Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Great to be here.
So, you know our buddy Micky, the slightly crazy one.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, he's got a YouTube channel going now. It's called Mickytolife. Seriously, you should check it out. He's got some pretty fun stuff over there.
Good for him. Always entertaining, that guy.
Totally. Okay, but switching gears a bit, sometimes you might be listening and thinking, why are we always talking about China?
Yeah, that's a fair question. And well, the simple answer is you kind of have to these days.
Right.
Think about it this way. Whether you're tuning in from Taiwan or, here in the U.S. or maybe across the pond in Europe. Mm-hmm. What happens in China doesn't just stay in China.
It really doesn't. It creates ripples, right?
Exactly. The ripples reach everywhere.
For our listeners in Taiwan, I mean, it's obvious, right? China's your huge neighbor, right there.
Mm-hmm. Constant presence.
And what they do, it affects pretty much everything. Security, obviously. Right. The economy. Taiwan's place in the world.
So understanding what's going on isn't about, being afraid or anything.
No. It's more like checking the weather. You just need to know what's coming so you can be prepared, Grab an umbrella if you need it.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
And for us here in the States, I mean, China's on the news constantly. They're a competitor, sure.
Big time.
But they're also a huge part of our supply chains. Look around you. Probably half the stuff in your room has components from China. My phone definitely does.
Mine too, probably.
And they're a massive player in deciding how the world's going to look in the future, trying to understand global stuff without looking at China. It's like trying to watch a complicated movie but skipping every other scene.
You'd be totally lost.
Completely.
And it's the same for our listeners in the UK, in Europe. China isn't just that, economic miracle far away anymore.
Not at all. It's way past that.
They're central to global trade. They're pushing technology forward. Think 5G, AI, all that.
Right. Our phones, our computers.
And even the big conversations like human rights or information, what you see online, China's influencing that too, maybe directly, maybe indirectly, but it's there.
It really is part of the global atmosphere now.
So yeah, when we talk about China, it's not because we like it or dislike it or want to tell anyone what to think.
Definitely not. It's just necessary. It's about getting a clearer picture of the world we all live in. You can't really make sense of things, avoid misjudging situations if you ignore such a huge piece of the puzzle.
It's not about meddling, it's about perspective.
Exactly. Which brings us neatly to what we're really diving into today.
Let's do it. What's on the docket?
We're calling this segment Global Headline Newsflash. A quick rundown of some major things happening around the world.
Okay, Global Headline Newsflash. I like it. Let's jump in. What's first?
All right, first up, some very significant news from the Vatican. Pope Francis passed away on April 21st, 2025.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I heard about that. He was 88, right?
That's right, 88. Reports say it was a stroke, which then led to heart failure. And, he had dealt with some respiratory issues in the past.
Yeah, I remember him being hospitalized a couple of times, but wasn't he, still working pretty much right up until the end?
Apparently so. Pretty active the day before, which really says something about his drive, I guess.
Definitely. And the funeral, that was huge, wasn't it?
Absolutely massive. Held on April 26th, right there in St. Peter's Square. The estimates are around 400,000 people attended.
400,000, that's incredible.
It really is. And it wasn't just pilgrims. We're talking dignitaries from 170 countries, 50 heads of state, 11 reigning monarchs.
Wow. Kings, queens, presidents, the works.
Pretty much everyone. It just shows you the kind of global figure he really was. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re gave the eulogy.
What did he focus on?
He talked a lot about Pope Francis's ability to connect with ordinary people. That common touch he was known for.
Yeah, he seemed very down to earth for a pope.
Totally. And that was reflected in his funeral wishes, too. He specifically asked for a simplified service. A plain wooden coffin. None of the usual, ornate stuff.
Just simple. Consistent with his message, I guess.
Exactly. And here's a really interesting detail, his burial place. He chose the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome.
Okay. Why is that significant?
Because almost all popes, for over a century, since Leo III back in 1903, have been buried in the Vatican grottos, like underneath St. Peter's Basilica.
Ah, so he broke with a long tradition there.
He did. It really seems to underline that desire for a perhaps more humble, less Vatican-centric legacy, you could say.
Interesting. So what happens now? This must be a huge moment for Catholics worldwide.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about 1.4 billion people. The church has now entered what's called a sede vacante period.
Which means?
The seat is vacant. Basically, there's no pope until a new one is elected.
Right. And the election process is the conclave, yeah.
That's the one. The cardinals gather, lock themselves in essentially, and vote. The expectation is that the conclave will happen pretty soon, maybe around May 5th or 6th.
And the speculation machine is already running, I bet.
Oh, definitely. The rumor mill is in full swing. Names are being thrown around. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State, is mentioned quite a bit as a possible successor. It's like papal predictions time.
Yeah. Now, there was a little bit of international politics mixed in with the funeral, too, wasn't there? Something about Taiwan and China.
There was. Taiwan sent a high-level representative, former Vice President Chen Zhen, as President Tsai's special envoy.
Okay, seems normal for a country with diplomatic ties to the Vatican.
Right, but China, they didn't send anyone official. And the reason cited was that the Vatican refused to exclude Taiwan's representative.
So it highlights that ongoing diplomatic tension. The Vatican recognizes Taiwan. China doesn't like that.
Precisely. It's this delicate balancing act the Vatican has been trying to manage with Beijing for years, and this just brought it to the forefront again.
It really puts the Vatican in a tough spot sometimes.
It does. Just to give some context on Pope Francis's impact, that 1.4 billion Catholic figure, that's roughly 17.7% of the entire world population.
Huge number.
And Francis being the first pope from Latin America was itself historic. He really pushed the church towards focusing more on social justice, immigration, climate change.
Yeah, he definitely made waves on those issues.
He did, and it resonated with many. Pew Research did a poll back in 2023, showed him with an 83% approval rating among Catholics globally, particularly high in Latin America and Africa.
That's a pretty strong legacy, then. All right, let's shift gears, unfortunately, to a region with ongoing conflict, India and Pakistan. Sounds like things have flared up again.
Yeah, sadly, tensions have escalated quite seriously in Kashmir.
What happened this time?
On April 22nd, 2025, there was a major terror attack at a military checkpoint in Indian-controlled Kashmir.
Oh, no casualties.
Yes, quite high. Reports say 26 people were killed, 18 Indian soldiers and 8 civilians.
That's awful. And does India know who was behind it?
India is pointing the finger directly at Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, accusing them of backing a militant group called Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Okay, that's a serious accusation. How did they respond?
India recalled its high commissioner, basically their top diplomat from Pakistan. That's a significant diplomatic set.
Pakistan's reaction.
Pakistan has strongly denied any involvement. They're claiming India is just trying to deflect attention from its own internal political issues. It's kind of the standard script we often see in these situations.
Yeah, that back and forth sounds familiar. Did it stop at diplomatic moves, or did things get worse?
Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. There have been reports of small-scale military clashes along the line of control of the de facto border.
Clashes like?
Things like artillery fire, maybe some drone activity. Initial reports mentioned at least 5 military casualties, though details are often hard to confirm immediately.
Right. Has anyone tried to step in? The UN, maybe?
The UN has called for restraint from both sides, as you'd expect. They've also offered to deploy observers along the low sea, but so far neither India nor Pakistan has agreed to that.
And what about the people living there? This must be terrifying for them.
Absolutely. Thousands of civilians in the border areas have reportedly been displaced, forced to flee their homes. There's a growing humanitarian concern there.
It's just so volatile, especially when you remember the history.
Exactly. The Kashmir dispute goes all the way back to the partition in 1947. They fought major wars over it, 1947, 1965, the Kargil conflict in 1999.
And the really scary part, both sides have nuclear weapons.
That's the terrifying backdrop to all of this. A 2024 SciPri report estimated India has around 170 nuclear warheads, and Pakistan has about 180. Any escalation carries enormous risks.
So what are other countries saying? The U.S., China?
The international reaction has been, well, cautious. The U.S. State Department urged dialogue and offered to help mediate if both sides wanted it. China called for restraint, but didn't explicitly back either side. It's a tricky diplomatic situation for everyone.
And has the situation in Kashmir itself been getting worse lately? I remember reading something about changes India made a few years ago.
Yes. Many analysts connect the recent uptick in violence to India's revocation of Article 370 back in 2019, which changed Kashmir's special status. The International Crisis Group, in a 2024 report, noted a significant increase in violence. Since then, they cited a 22% jump in terror attacks in 2023 compared to the previous year.
Wow.
And Indian Defense Ministry data for 2024 indicated over 200 militants killed in operations in Kashmir, but also, tragically, rising civilian casualties.
It's always hard to get solid information from conflict zones, isn't it?
Extremely hard. Direct, authoritative reporting is often limited. So for anyone following this closely, the best advice is always to check multiple, credible international news sources. Reuters, BBC, Al Jazeera are usually reliable to try and piece together the latest updates and confirm details.
Good advice. Okay, let's move from South Asia to Eastern Europe. Another tragic headline, it seems, from Kyiv.
Yes, unfortunately. On April 24th, 2025, Kyiv suffered a large-scale Russian missile attack.
What made this one stand out? Kyiv's been hit so many times.
A couple things. First, the reported use of North Korean-made ballistic missiles, specifically the KN-23 model. These are short-range but have a decent reach, around 690 kilometers.
North Korean missiles in Ukraine, that's concerning.
Very. It suggests ongoing military supply from Pyongyang to Moscow, which violates UN sanctions. Second, the targets seem to include the city center and critical energy infrastructure. And third, the reported human cost was significant.
How bad was it?
Initial reports mentioned 13 people killed and over 90 injured. Residential buildings were damaged and a power plant was hit. Some sources are calling it one of the deadliest single attacks on Kyiv since the full-scale invasion began in 2022, though that's sometimes hard to verify definitively.
Just awful. And these North Korean missiles, are they particularly dangerous?
Well, according to military analysts, the KN-23 is known for being quite maneuverable and flying at a low trajectory, which can make it harder for air defense systems to intercept. A UN Security Council report in 2024 had already flagged North Korea supplying weapons to Russia. Ukrainian intelligence estimates that Russia might have imported at least 200 of these missiles since 2024.
So, a clear violation of international rules.
Absolutely. No question about that.
How did Ukraine and the world react?
President Zelensky immediately condemned it as a terrorist act. He also repeated his urgent calls for more advanced air defense systems, specifically mentioning Patriot missiles.
And did allies respond?
The U.S. quickly announced an additional $500 million military aid package for Ukraine, specifically including anti-missile capabilities. And the UN Secretary General Guterres issued a statement condemning the attack as a violation of international humanitarian law.
The sheer scale of these attacks over time is just staggering.
It really is. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense released figures suggesting over 3,500 Russian missile and drone attacks just in 2024.
3,500?
Yes, causing an estimated 4,800 civilian casualties. And Kyiv, as the capital, has remained a frequent target throughout the war.
What's the thinking behind these constant attacks on cities and infrastructure? Is it just pure attrition?
That seems to be a key part of the strategy, yes. The Institute for International Strategic Studies suggested in a 2024 report that it's largely a war of attrition, with Russia trying to degrade Ukraine's capabilities and, perhaps more importantly, undermine public morale.
And the impact on daily life must be immense. The power plant hit, for example.
Exactly. Reports indicate a worsening energy crisis in Kyiv following this attack, with maybe close to 30% of the city potentially facing power outages. This raises serious concerns, especially with thinking ahead to winter heating needs.
And the overall cost of the war just keeps climbing.
Astronomically.
Yeah.
The World Bank's estimate for Ukraine's reconstruction needs in 2025 alone was over $600 billion. It's a staggering figure that shows the devastating economic toll.
It's heartbreaking. Okay, let's shift focus again, maybe closer to home for some of our listeners. What's happening related to Taiwan?
Quite a few things on the radar there. First, there seems to be significant movement on these large-scale recall campaigns against politicians.
Recall campaigns? Tell me more.
Yeah, these are citizen-initiated efforts, people gathering signatures to try and remove elected officials they're unhappy with. It's happening at both local and central government levels, and it seems to be targeting legislators from both the main parties, the DPP and the KMT.
Why are people trying to recall them?
It seems to be a mix of reasons: disputes over specific policies, maybe some perceived inappropriate behavior, or just a general crisis of confidence in certain politicians.
Is this widespread?
Well, Taiwan Election Commission data apparently indicated that over 55% of the public expressed dissatisfaction with current politicians generally. So these recall efforts might be seen as one way people are trying to voice that frustration. It's like a direct feedback mechanism, you know?
Got ya. So are any of these recalls actually likely to succeed?
Based on the current reports, it looks like several KMT legislators might be facing serious recall threats, potentially leading to recall votes. Interestingly, the same reports suggest that, for now, no DPP legislators seem to be in the same boat.
That could reflect something about the current political winds, maybe?
It could, yeah. It's definitely something political analysts are watching closely, especially thinking ahead to the 2026 local elections.
Okay, what else on the Taiwan front? There was something about a specific term, green communist.
Ah, yes. This is an interesting point about language and censorship. So green communist is a term used sometimes within Taiwan, usually by critics of the ruling DPP party.
Green referring to the DPP's party color, right?
Exactly. And they add communist to try and link the DPP's policies or style to communism or authoritarianism. It's basically a political insult used domestically in Taiwan. Okay?
We'll be back in a jiffy.
Don't go anywhere, folks.
All right, so we're back. Okay, so how does China come into this?
Well, when that term travels across the strait, it becomes politically radioactive in mainland China. Because the ruling party is the Communist Party, any term that uses communist in a negative or critical way is extremely sensitive.
Even if it's aimed at a Taiwanese party?
Even then. You just can't criticize anything associated with the word communist publicly in China. It hits too close to home for the CCP.
So what happens? Do they just ignore it?
No. Reports indicate active censorship. Radio Free Asia mentioned in 2024 that China's internet censors, the Cyberspace Administration, filter out green communist. They also filter things like Taiwan independence or dictator on platforms like Weibo and Douyin.
The Great Firewall in action again?
Pretty much. It's a massive operation using both AI and huge numbers of human censors. One estimate suggested they processed over 1 billion pieces of sensitive content in 2024.
1 billion?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And research from the Chinese University of Hong Kong in 2023 found that discussions about Taiwan politics are really heavily restricted on Chinese social media, maybe around 78% restricted. Especially anything critical of the DPP, likely to avoid any unwelcome comparisons with the CCP's own rule.
What do experts in Taiwan make of this?
Scholars there tend to see it as evidence of Beijing's really tight ideological control. There's also a concern that this kind of censorship widens the gap in understanding between people on both sides of the strait. Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research also highlighted in a 2024 report how China uses this information control as part of a broader strategy to shape public opinion in its favor and try to undermine the DPP internationally.
It sounds like a really complex information environment. I saw a note here, listeners suggesting maybe the different parties in Taiwan could cooperate more, given this common external pressure.
That's a really important point, and it leads into the next topic: political consensus and potential cooperation within Taiwan.
Is there any common ground between the parties like the DPP, KMT, and TPP when it comes to China?
Fundamentally, yes. Despite all their domestic disagreements, there seems to be a pretty solid underlying consensus among all major parties in opposing communism and defending Taiwan's democratic system. This becomes especially clear when facing direct pressure from Beijing.
Like with the increased military activity.
Exactly. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported a 15% increase in Chinese military exercises near Taiwan in 2024. That kind of pressure tends to forge some level of unity, at least on the need for strong defense. We saw some consensus emerge on the defense budget for 2025, a pretty substantial NT $680 billion, and broad agreement on the importance of international cooperation.
So what are the suggestions for how they could cooperate more effectively?
Scholars and think tanks have put forward ideas. Things like prioritizing cooperation specifically on countering external threats, maybe revising laws like the anti-infiltration law together, strengthening security ties with the U.S., Japan, Australia, pushing for more international space collectively.
The idea being deal with the outside threat first, then argue about domestic stuff later.
Kind of, yeah. A crisis priority model, as one think tank called it. Setting up mechanisms for cross-party consultation during major crises. The focus would be on banding together when facing external pressure and keeping the internal competition focused on economic and social policies when things are calmer.
Makes sense in theory, but is it realistic? Can they actually overcome their differences?
That's the big challenge. Deep ideological divides remain, especially on the fundamental questions about Taiwan's future relationship with China unification versus independence, how to manage cross-strait policy day to day. These differences make full cooperation difficult.
Is there any polling on whether the public thinks they can cooperate?
Yeah, a national Chengchi University poll in 2024 found that only 42% of the Taiwanese public felt confident that the major parties could effectively cooperate during a major crisis.
So less than half. Shows the level of skepticism.
It does. There's recognition of the need, but real doubts about the ability to execute, given the political history and divisions.
Okay, one more Taiwan-related item, but this one involves Ukraine and the U.S., a mineral agreement.
Yes, this is quite significant. Back in March 2025, Ukraine and the U.S. finalized a critical minerals cooperation memorandum.
Critical minerals, like rare earths and stuff.
Exactly. Things like lithium, cobalt, nickel components for batteries, electronics, green energy tech. The main aim is for the U.S. and Ukraine to work together on mining and processing these minerals in Ukraine.
Why is that important?
Two big reasons. First, it helps diversify the global supply chain away from its current heavy reliance on China for many of these materials. Second, it's a potential economic lifeline for Ukraine.
Ukraine has significant deposits of these.
It does. The U.S. Geological Survey estimated back in 2023 that Ukraine has substantial reserves, like maybe 500,000 tons of lithium and 70,000 tons of cobalt, enough to be a serious global player if developed.
And how does the deal work? Is the U.S. just buying the stuff?
No, it's structured as more of an equal partnership, apparently. The U.S. provides technology and investment capital, Ukraine provides the mining rights, and then they share the profit.
That sounds potentially very beneficial for Ukraine, especially given the economic devastation from the war.
Absolutely. Ukraine's economy took a massive hit. GDP contracted maybe 12% in 2024 alone. This agreement offers a path towards recovery and rebuilding, leveraging their natural resources. It also strengthens the U.S. strategic position in the global race for new energy supply chains.
The fact that it's a partnership suggests Ukraine had some leverage.
It seems so. It wasn't just a resource grab. It reflects Ukraine's own agency and negotiation strength, even amidst the war.
What has the international reaction been?
Well, Russia criticized it, predictably, calling it U.S. plunder. On the other hand, the European Union has reportedly expressed interest in similar cooperation with Ukraine.
Makes sense, given the demand for these minerals is soaring.
It's exactly. The International Energy Agency projected in 2024 that global demand for critical minerals could triple by 2030. So Ukraine's potential is becoming a real geopolitical focus point.
Are there challenges to actually getting these mines up and running?
Yes, significant ones. Many of the potential mining areas are in eastern Ukraine, which has suffered heavy infrastructure damage due to the war. The World Bank estimated it could take at least $10 billion just to get Ukraine's mining sector properly rehabilitated and operational. So it's a long-term project with hurdles.
Definitely something to watch. Okay, let's broaden out again. Any other quick global headlines you should touch on?
Yeah, a few quick ones. First, something potentially mind-blowing from space.
Ooh, aliens.
Huh? Well, maybe. On April 17th, 2025, scientists using the James Webb Space Telescope detected dimethyl sulfide, DMS, and dimethyl disulfide, DMDS, in the atmosphere of an exoplanet called K2-18b. It's about 124 light years away.
Okay. And why are those chemicals exciting?
Because, as far as we know, on Earth, these specific compounds are only produced by biological life, mainly phytoplankton in the oceans.
Whoa.
Seriously?
Seriously. So this is being described as possibly the strongest hint yet of potential biosignatures, signs of life beyond Earth. Now, scientists are very cautious, saying more verification is absolute needed, but still.
Wow. That is wow. Okay, what else? Something about science protests.
Yes, back on March 7th, 2025, there were Stand Up for Science demonstrations held in the U.S. and France.
Protesting what?
Primarily budget cuts and policies perceived as restricting scientific research, particularly those associated with the Trump administration in the U.S. They were worried about funding cuts and actions against agencies like the EPA and NOAA.
Who showed up?
Reports mention around 2,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial in D.C., including some prominent science figures like Francis Collins, Phil Plait, and Bill Nye the Science Guy. They were calling for restored funding and respect for scientific evidence.
Good for them. And one more quick one, something fun.
Let's end on a fun note. Rio Carnival in Brazil. It ran from February 28th to March 8th, 2025.
Ah, Carnival. Always looks amazing. Totally. Kicked off with the mayor handing the symbolic key to the city over to King Momo. Then it was a solid week of celebration, highlighted by those spectacular samba school parades in the Sambadrome.
The floats, the costumes, the dancing.
Exactly. Elaborate costumes, incredible floats, non-stop samba rhythms. Attracts hundreds of thousands of tourists every year. A huge party.
Okay, that's quite a whirlwind tour of global events.
It really is. From papal transitions to geopolitical hotspots, potential life on other planets, it covers a lot of ground.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is, doesn't it? Even things that seem totally separate.
Absolutely. A change in leadership in Rome can have diplomatic ripple effects involving Taiwan and China. Tensions in Kashmir raise global security concerns because of nuclear weapons. War in Ukraine impacts global energy and mineral supplies.
And scientific discoveries challenge our whole place in the universe.
Precisely. It's all part of this incredibly complex, constantly shifting global picture.
Which brings us to maybe a more philosophical point. We touched on the insights of Christopher Langan, the guy with the super high IQ.
Yes, Christopher Langan. Often cited as having one of the highest recorded IQs, maybe somewhere between 190 and 210, depending on the estimate. Quite a non-traditional background, too. Grew up poor, worked as a bouncer, construction worker, farmer.
Not your typical academic path. What drives someone like that? He wasn't focused on money, apparently.
No, his primary motivation seems to have always been the pursuit of knowledge and understanding the fundamental nature of reality. He talks about spending his childhood just reading everything he could get his hands on, trying to figure out the world.
How does he think about intelligence itself?
It's interesting. He talks about intelligence having both depth, the ability to focus intensely on one thing, and aperture, the ability to broaden or narrow your focus, to see the big picture and the details. He suggests that sometimes very high IQ people can struggle with the aperture part, getting stuck in the depth. Flexibility is key.
That makes sense. Did he have any thoughts on, the challenges of pursuing truth?
Yeah, he expressed a somewhat cynical view, suggesting that people who pursue truth too relentlessly might get weeded out by those who hold wealth and power, the globalists, as he might put it, because deep truths can sometimes challenge established structures.
And what did he see as the ultimate human drive?
He believed the search for meaning is humanity's primary motivation, more fundamental than, say, sex or survival instincts, in his view.
That's a deep thought. And he developed his own model of the universe, right? The CTMU.
Yes, the cognitive theoretic model of the universe. It came out as deep dives into physics, especially Einstein, and logic, like Bertrand Russell. He had this realization, he said, that reality itself is fundamentally a blend of geometry and language.
Okay, that sounds complicated. What's the core idea?
At its heart, the CTMU proposes that the theory describing reality, the cognitive theory, which is a kind of language, the language used, the universe itself, and the model mapping between them, are all essentially the same thing. It's a very self-referential, closed-loop kind of idea.
Wow. Okay. How does God fit into that picture, if at all?
The CTMU views reality as having a fundamental identity. Langan equates this with the biblical statement attributed to God, I am that I am. He argues that the core attributes you can derive purely logically from this basic self-identity principle align remarkably well with the attributes traditionally assigned to God in major world religions, Abrahamic faiths, but also concepts in Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism.
So God is the fundamental self-awareness of reality itself.
Something like that, yeah.
Right.
And consciousness, in his model, isn't just in humans or animals. He suggests it exists in a rudimentary form in every part of the universe, linked to a fundamental identity operator, or quantum.
Even in, a rock?
In a sense, yes. Not self-awareness as we know it, but a fundamental participation in the universal consciousness or identity. He sees physical forces as part of the picture, but ultimately indeterminate, with the universe's actual events being shaped or decided by a collective drive, maybe even human will, interpreted broadly towards creating the best possible reality.
That is a lot to wrap your head around. Very different way of looking at things.
Definitely challenges conventional thinking. Whether you agree with it or not, it's a fascinating perspective from a unique mind.
Absolutely. Okay, let's bring it back to something more concrete, maybe. There was that YouTube video about the Taiwanese delegation visiting the U.S.
Right. The Suchin video discussing the visit by a cross-party group of Taiwanese legislators to the United States.
And the cross-party aspect was important.
Very significant. Having members from different parties traveling together was meant to send a strong signal of unity on issues of national security, especially to their U.S. counterparts.
Who did they meet with in the U.S.?
A pretty high level, it seems. Members of Congress, both House and Senate, but also officials from the administration Commerce Department, national security, and defense officials. It suggests the U.S. placed considerable importance on the visit.
What was the main message they wanted to deliver?
The core goal was to convey Taiwan's collective determination and commitment to its own self-defense and national security. They wanted to reassure the U.S. that, despite internal political differences, there's a fundamental consensus on security matters.
And how did the U.S. respond? Was there reassurance back?
Yes, according to the video's account, high-ranking U.S. officials explicitly stated that Taiwan is considered an irreplaceable entity. And, crucially, they said Taiwan would not be used as a bargaining chip in any U.S.-China negotiations.
That's a pretty direct statement. Addresses a long-standing fear in Taiwan, right? The pawn idea.
Exactly. It was a clear attempt to counter that abandoned Taiwan narrative. There was also positive news on the economic front mentioned.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
The U.S. apparently listed Taiwan as one of its top 4 priority partners for upcoming tariff negotiations, alongside Japan, South Korea, and Vietnam. That underscores Taiwan's importance in global supply chains, especially tech.
That's big.
And there was progress mentioned on the long-delayed agreement to avoid double taxation between the U.S. and Taiwan, which could really boost bilateral investment if finalized.
Okay, so mostly positive signals. Did the U.S. raise any concerns?
Yes, a couple of key ones. One concern brought up was the occasional tendency for Taiwan's parliament to freeze or cut parts of the defense budget. The worry is that this could undermine allies' confidence in Taiwan's commitment to self-defense. Consistency was stressed.
Fair point. What else?
Another major emphasis from the U.S. side was on export controls, specifically preventing high-tech products, especially advanced semiconductor chips made in Taiwan, from being illegally transferred to restricted countries, China being the main concern through things like relabeling or false declarations.
That transshipment issue.
Right. The U.S. apparently warned that if these controls aren't tight enough, they might have to impose punitive tariffs, which could hit Taiwanese companies, particularly smaller ones, really hard.
That sounds serious. Did Taiwan offer any solutions?
Yes. The delegation proposed establishing a direct cooperation mechanism between Taiwanese and U.S. law enforcement agencies, maybe Taiwan's Investigation Bureau and the FBI. The idea is to work together proactively to investigate these illegal channels, rather than just relying on punishment after the fact.
How was that received?
Apparently, quite positively. The U.S. side seemed receptive to a more cooperative, preventative approach.
Any other interesting proposals mentioned?
There was discussion about leveraging Taiwan's Coast Guard more effectively to counter China's gray zone tactics, those actions that fall short of outright military conflict. Using the Coast Guard avoids immediate military escalation.
Makes sense.
And tied to that was a recommendation to strengthen cooperation between Taiwan's Coast Guard and those of the U.S., Japan, the Philippines, and Australia. The U.S. reportedly expressed strong interest in that idea, too.
So a lot of focus on security cooperation, both military and economic. But the video also mentioned warnings about infiltration.
Yes. It shifted to warnings reportedly issued by Taiwan's National Security Bureau about China increasing its infiltration efforts using new and concerning tactics.
Like what? What are these new tactics?
Several things were mentioned. One was allegedly colluding with organized crime groups, gangs, to build up armed internal factions. The worrying suggestion being they could potentially be used for disruptive actions, maybe even symbolically raising the PRC flag somewhere briefly.
Wow, using gangs.
That was the claim. Also providing funds to recruit retired military personnel for intelligence gathering. Setting up underground banks or casinos to gain leverage over current military members, perhaps through debt, to coerce them into providing classified information. Even offering things like discounted flights as bait.
That's insidious.
Very. Other tactics mentioned included using seemingly harmless activities like temple events as cover to get close to military bases or personnel to film things or gather intel. Using online platforms like Facebook or Line to contact military personnel who might be in financial trouble, offering debt relief in exchange for information or help recruiting others, sometimes using cryptocurrency to make transactions harder to trace.
So exploiting vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And also using Taiwanese business people or other individuals with legitimate reasons to travel as cover to approach government officials or elected representatives to subtly gather sensitive information.
There was also something about an intelligence map.
Yeah, a particularly alarming report mentioned the alleged existence of a detailed intelligence map focusing on Taiwanese gang networks aligned to varying degrees with Beijing. This map supposedly included locations of gang strongholds, estimates of weapon quantities, contact methods, who was more pro-CCP, and even the locations of nearby police stations.
What would be the purpose of such a map?
The implication was that it could be used to plan or coordinate internal subversion or disruption. Now, the video rightly emphasized that the authenticity of this map needs verification, but the mere possibility highlights the potential risks Taiwan faces.
It sounds like a multi-pronged effort, not just military pressure.
Absolutely. The report also discussed ongoing psychological or divisive tactics, continuously spreading narratives designed to undermine trust in Taiwan's allies, particularly the U.S. America is unreliable, and America will abandon Taiwan arguments.
Trying to isolate Taiwan mentally.
Precisely. Also, potentially trying to stir up internal conflict by attacking Taiwan's own defense budget, spreading fear about the inevitability of war, or amplifying economic anxieties like focusing on the negative impacts of those U.S. export controls to create panic and erode public confidence in the government and the democratic system itself.
It's a complex picture. External pressure, internal infiltration attempts, psychological warfare.
It really is. It underscores the need for vigilance, but also perhaps for internal reflection within Taiwan about the common interests and values that are crucial for the island's overall resilience and well-being in the face of these multifaceted challenges.
Definitely gives you a lot to think about. Wow, we've covered a huge amount of ground today.
We really have. From the Vatican to Kashmir, Kiev, exoplanets, high IQ theories, and deep into Taiwan's security landscape.
It just shows how dynamic and interconnected everything is, doesn't it? Seemingly disparate events really do weave together into this complex global tapestry.
Absolutely. You pull one thread, and you often find it connected to many others in unexpected ways.
Makes you really consider the underlying connections and the broader implications of everything we hear in the news. So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. Reflecting on all the information about Taiwan's security challenges, the external pressures, the internal divisions, the infiltration tactics. What do you think are the most crucial steps, not just for governments, but for a society as a whole, to maintain stability and foster resilience in the face of such multifaceted pressures?
That's a deep question. No easy answers there.
Definitely not. Something to ponder. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope you found it insightful, maybe a little thought-provoking. Tune in next time for another episode of Sip and Talk.